The
This
meeting is online.
conference will now be recorded.
So sorry about that. Let's continue. We have approved the meeting agenda and the minutes inside the House. Now we're under lead planning agency for air quality agenda reports.
Well, yeah, but I'm like
Number 3
somehow
is the
just got
Air
the session.
Pollution Control Division and Jessica. Jessica, I hope you can hear us now, and please forgive us for the delay here. And now we can't hear Jessica. Yeah.
No, my speaker's on.
Is Jessica presenting?
She is not on.
She's not on. She didn't get back on. Yeah, with this. Okay, let's skip over Jessica. We'll wait on that for a second. Let's move through the air quality planning agenda. Number 4 is Regional Air Quality Control Council, the RAC. That is a written report in your packet, as well as number 5, the NFRMPO Air Quality Program update. That is written. So let's exit the air quality planning agenda and move into the MPO organization agenda. Number 6 is report of the chair. For the sake of brevity, I have none. Oh, I do. Oh, I am. I'm foolhardy. Dan, if you would kindly, Trustee Dean is the new assignee from Milliken. Tell us a little bit about yourself, sir, and why you come to these foolhardy meetings.
Well, I was drafted by the mayor, of course, but the reason I was drafted is I was a city town manager for nearly 40 years. And I had some experience with North Front Range NPO, and when I was in Meade before they decided to go entirely with Dr. Cog. And my government experience, she thought I would probably understand a little more than most.
And you referee basketball in your spare time. Good for you. Good for you. Well, Trustee Dean, welcome. It's good to have you here. Thank you. And help us as we muddle through here. Okay, that's the report of the chair. Number 7 is executive director report, please.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a couple of things to talk about tonight. The first one is that Federal Rail Administration reached out to the North Front Range NPO to participate in the Amtrak Daily Long Distance Service Study for both the Northwest and the Southwest regions of the country. Alex was our person that attended that. The study is a requirement in the infrastructure of the IIJA and is expected to be completed in November of 2023. The study will evaluate options for restoring and enhancing daily basics intercity passenger rail service along routes, select preferred options for restoring or enhancing service, develop a prioritized inventory of capital projects and other actions required to restore or enhance the service, including cost estimates and those projects and actions, develop recommendations for methods by which Amtrak could work with local communities and organizations to develop activities and programs to continually improve public use of intercity passenger rail service along each route, and to identify federal and non-federal funding sources. This has all been emailed to you, so I'm not going to finish reading the rest of it, but all council members have received this. The upshot of this is they are asking for your input. And I don't know if you can bring up that in the chat or not, Alex, but we did email out to you the FRA long distance rail study link that would you please go out and submit your comments by March 17th. The copy of this is in your packet, so this is also in your handout materials, and it is at the bottom of that report, that web link. So if you would please go ahead and fill that out, that would be great. Then the other piece I have is just a legislative report, since we're in the legislative session right now. I'm not going to go through some of the ones that we did last time, but we do have one that has had some changes in it, and that is House Bill 231101. This is the Ozone Season Transit Grant Program Flexibility. This really had some items in there that I think the last month when we talked that a lot of us were saying, yeah, this seems like a good idea. But we also had some conversation about having at least one voting representative of a transit agency on the TPR or our boards, which we already do. that there was an amendment, and I'm going to read that amendment because it's fairly short, that did get approved today. Now, remember, the bill hasn't been passed or anything. It's just the amendment got incorporated into this. And the amendment says, no later than July 1 of 2024, the Transportation Commission shall update its rules governing the statewide transportation process and transportation planning regions. And I'm not going to read the citations to you, sorry. To adjust the boundaries of the transportation planning regions as defined in section 43 in a manner that ensures that the state's population is proportionally and equitably represented on the Transportation Advisory Committee created in section 43. And I think that means stack.
Stack, that's what that means.
Yeah. So when deciding what adjustments to make to the boundaries of the transportation regions, the commission shall consider highway corridors, safety and asset management considerations, commuting and other travel patterns, transit-oriented development, and levels of air pollution, including criteria pollutants and greenhouse gas pollutants. So that's the amendment that got incorporated into this ozone season transit program. So that was one of them. The other one that I wanted to bring to your attention was the greenhouse gas emissions reduction measure. We touched on this last month, as well as Senate Bill 2316. This is the one that is changing the potential reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions out in the out years. So they're looking at trying to go from 90% to 100% by 2050, I believe. Yeah. So those are so those would change. If that changes, that would obviously change the rule for the greenhouse gas that we are under right now, that we do our greenhouse gas report on. And I think those were the big changes. Oh, the other one is, I did forget this one. Senate Bill 23059 is a retail delivery fees. This one is creating it right now. The retail delivery fees are helping to fund the enterprises that were set up in Senate Bill 260. This is creating an exemption from the fees for businesses with retail sales of less than or equal to $500,000 in any 1 year. So this allows sellers to pay the fee to the purchaser behalf, such that the fee does not need to be separately itemized, but it does have impacts to the enterprises. So those are the ones I just wanted to bring to your attention. So that is my report.
Questions for Suzette, please.
So with the HB 231101, where is that now? Is it passed through the?
It goes to the committee of the whole.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then, yeah, the retail delivery fee thing was a surprise to me because I actually serve on one of the enterprises and we did not know about it before it got introduced. So we had to adopt a budget, knowing that the budget, I guess, will have to be amended, I guess, because it's retroactive.
Right. You mean if this is passed?
It's gonna get. I mean, everything that I hear is that it's gonna pass. So I think I think it has the support of the governor. That's my understanding. So, yeah. So I think that, to me, that one feels like a done deal. So I mean, but it does reduce our transportation funding, by about $1.5 million a year. So it is what it is. All right, and so that one's going to the whole
With the 11, is it 1101?
1101.
Yes.
Yeah, 1101 is at the committee of the whole.
Okay, and so it gets voted on, and does it have to go back to the House because it has that amendment that got added on at the Senate?
That's a good question that I'm not overly sure.
Okay.
Does it?
Does does that go back to their committee or it goes back to the House, the whole House to approve it? I don't know.
I got a text into both Senator Kurtmeyer and Rep. Armagost to see if they know anything. And the way I read that it could be bad news for TPRs. But, so we'll see. Yeah. Other comments or questions for Suzette, please? Okay. Let's move on then
Yes,
to the
oh,
TAC report, number 8. That is in
hello.
your pack. The finance report is as well,
Huh?
as is the Community Advisory Committee, all written within
Hello.
your pack. So we're at number 11, presentations. That's the Colorado-Wyoming Transit Feasibility Study. Ian Chase, please. Oh, sir.
Would it be better to have him sit here for the
Ian,
microphone?
it might be because that's the microphone. So come sit by me.
Johnny won't push.
Yeah.
All right. As long as I can see the screen. Sorry again.
Hello.
Um, and where's the
Hello.
Like if the microphone's just in this laptop,
Okay. Okay.
and
Great.
and
Thank you
Can
all
anyone hear me over there?
Case. I'm a transportation planner with HDR, consulting firm located in Denver. We were hired on to work through this study, the Colorado-Wyoming Transit Feasibility Study. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on this study, discuss the transit market analysis that went into the study, alternatives development, screening results, and the final alternative that came out of the study, and next steps. So a little bit of a background on it. This study came about sort of towards the tail end of the Link NoCo regional transit study that Alex Gordon was obviously involved in quite a bit. That study was looking at regional connections, transit connections here in the North Front Range, and our neighbors to the north, up in Cheyenne. It seemed, like it made sense to go ahead and study connecting Cheyenne and southern Wyoming to the North Front Range area. So that's how this study came about. It was a partnership between the Cheyenne MPO, YDOT, and CDOT. The project kicked off in March last year and just wrapped up in December. Let's see here, clicker. I don't know if you can get it to go. It's not. There we go. Thank you. So the vision for this study, basically it was a feasibility analysis examining transit connection possibilities between the North Front Range, all the communities here, and Cheyenne. And, I'm not going to go through all of these. I just sort of mentioned all of that, and I know we have limited time. I'll just dive right into it here. So there was an engagement process on this that we followed. There were sort of a three-pronged effort. Stakeholder interviews with policymakers, business representatives, potential transit users. We had a guidance committee. That committee included CDOT, YDOT, Cheyenne MPO, the partners, and then various agency, jurisdiction, technical staff. The guidance committee met 3 times throughout the project. And then we also had community engagement. We had a project website, a couple open houses to talk about the different alternatives that we were looking at. And it had a multicultural aspect, trying to be inclusive to all communities. So the first step was this transit market analysis, and essentially we were just trying to evaluate the travel patterns within this region, in between these two regions, and we used a few different data sources to analyze those patterns. We were looking at big data, travel demand models, and then we were also looking at US Census data. And I'll dig into each of those briefly here. So the big data analysis, for those of you that aren't really familiar with big data, basically we found a provider that provided us with data that tracks, basically compiles vehicle trip data, generally using cell phone data. Now that data is anonymized, so it's not tracking individual trips, but it aggregates those trips so that we could identify where the key origins and destinations are for trips traveling between these two communities, or two regions, excuse me. So we divvied up the Cheyenne area into about 15 zones, and the North Front Range MPO area into another 30 zones, and basically zoomed in and tried to focus in on those areas where you were getting a higher number of trips traveling back and forth. We also looked at travel demand model data. There are 3 travel demand models that we were focused on: the Cheyenne MPO model, the North Front Range model, and the CDOT statewide model. And we essentially just were focused on those trips that were traveling across the border between Colorado and Wyoming. And then alongside that, we were doing, we performed a transit propensity analysis. And essentially, we were trying to identify populations and those population centers within these communities that have individuals that are more likely to utilize transit. So there's this list here that we were focused on, various characteristics that do correspond with folks that are more likely to use transit. Households without vehicles, obviously, particular age groups, the youth, college age, seniors, folks with disabilities, low income, people of color, etc., and essentially highlighted those areas within the two regions. And from that, we were able to develop some focus areas, and these don't really, I don't think they're too surprising. Obviously, the Cheyenne area, which is one trip end for this potential transit line, was obviously a key area to focus on. And then in the North Front Range area, Fort Collins obviously popped out. Loveland, the Centera area popped out. Greeley a little bit, and then also we were noticing some interesting travel patterns in and out of the Wellington area in the northern North Front Range area. And this graphic, this image sort of summarizes all of that. The blue dots that you're seeing in these different maps, those are those market areas, those trip areas where we were seeing lots of trip ends between the two regions. The purple dots, those are areas where we were seeing the high transit propensity users. So in Cheyenne, it was sort of scattered all about. That Cheyenne downtown area really popping out. In Fort Collins, obviously downtown area in Fort Collins along that 287 corridor, the Mulberry Harmony corridor, and then Loveland Greeley, a little bit of a mix in that downtown Loveland area. You're getting some high propensity users and some of those OD trip ends going to and from Cheyenne. A lot of those trips in and out of Centera, not so much high propensity users in that area. And then over in Greeley, we were seeing lots of the type of population that you're looking for high transit users, but we did not see quite as many trip ends going to and from Cheyenne.
Can I interrupt you, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
When you talk about the type of person we're looking for, so are you going for a demographic typification? I mean, is that what you look for, or?
It's basically just like I had shown on that previous slide, where we're just trying to identify those populations that are more likely to use it. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to necessarily say, oh, we're only focused on those folks. We just know that, okay, there are certain characteristics that would lead to a more successful
So it's
transit system.
not an
if
actual
it's
survey of people then, it's
No.
just
No, that's where the US
demographics type overlay. is
Yes,
what it
that's
is.
where
Okay.
the US census data came into play.
Okay, okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, it
Yeah.
does.
So then we'll move into alternatives development and the screening process. So based on all the info that we pulled together, the project team, the guidance committee, and the partners, we developed these 6 alignments that touched on both ends. The Cheyenne side, you can see pretty much all of these alignments were going to downtown Cheyenne. It just made sense to focus on that area, that Cheyenne Downtown Transit Center. And Cheyenne is currently revising their transit system and reworking some of those routes up there. And so that downtown area, all of those routes hit that downtown Cheyenne Center. So it made sense to have that as the trip end in the north. In the south, you can see like alignment 1 goes to downtown Fort Collins. Alignment 2 hits downtown Fort Collins and Loveland. Alignment 3 follows the I-25 corridor. Alignment 4 is along US 85 over to Greeley. And then 5 and 6 are various loop alternatives that we also considered. Now there are some gray dots in there. You can see there's optional stops that were considered. These primarily shows just Wellington here, but this was just sort of that initial alignment that we were trying to hone in on. And then after coming up with that final recommendation, the project team did consider optional stops and considered tweaking that final alignment. This just shows the screening process, alignment alternatives, that first step, and then I'll touch on the screening criteria next. It was basically just one level of screening and then final alignment. So the screening process, we considered 5 major buckets that within each of these buckets, there were 2 or 3 different elements that fed the screening and the scoring process. Connectivity on the left there, that the screening process there considered key destinations that were connected to via this, via the different alignments. That includes, employment centers, college university centers, dense population areas, etc. Connectivity also considered local and regional transit connections. Feasibility was focused on the ridership potential and then the order of magnitude of cost for the different alignments. We have stakeholder community support in the middle, equity, looking at those transit propensity areas and disproportionately impacted communities. And then there was environmental health, looking at connections that were near medical facilities, veteran facilities as well, and then the potential to alleviate traffic, and that touched on actually decreasing VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and potential for reducing emissions. So the screening results, well, actually, before I get to that, we have a couple of slides. This shows what the guidance committee, their feedback. They wanted us to prioritize a few of those screening criteria. So we weighted those a little bit more heavily: connectivity, feasibility, and then the community stakeholder support. And then on the left, they had their own preferences for alignments, and it happened to be 1, 2, and 3. All of those along the Fort Collins, Loveland, or I-25 corridors. And then the public meeting, we did have 2 public meetings. The first one presented these different options, and we had a survey that was filled out with we had quite a few folks responding to it. The public open house had really amazing attendance, and part of that was just due to the partners and the North Front Range NPO really blasting out and getting this study out in front of people. In general, the results were in alignment with what the guidance committee was showing. It's Fort Collins and Loveland that really the public was wanting to connect to. The only difference really being that alignment 5 came to the top, which has the loop on the southern end there. This slide shows the results. Basically, you've got along the left there the 6 different alignments. Along the top, you've got our 5 different buckets that are in the along that top edge there in the colored cells. And then any score, the highest score was the full pie, you know, the filled in circle, and then the lowest score being one that's empty. And you can see that total score in the middle column. And as luck would have it, alignments 1 through 6 scored in that way, where alignment 1 ended up coming out towards the top and alignment 6 at the bottom. 3, 4, and 5 kind of fell into the middle. Yes? So the equity score, again, was based on what I touched upon earlier, was hitting those areas where transit users, the high propensity users, were located, disproportionately impacted communities. It's the low income communities, minority communities, etc. Does that answer your question?
Is there a DI community in Fort Collins?
That's my question. So,
Is there a DI
is there a
community?
disproportionately impacted community in Fort Collins?
I actually can't answer that question.
I don't believe
you know?
there is. I've studied those maps very heartily.
Yeah. There may be in Greeley, Loveland. It wasn't just strictly upon that. There were other elements, but you know, environmental health score was focused on which alignments reached medical facilities.
That's why I'm asking it.
Yeah. Yeah.
2 tier 2 top hospitals in Greeley, and there's no one going to Greeley. Zero.
The question being, though, was that location, that trip end that we had identified, was it within a certain distance, and generally walkable distance to reach that facility? Now, a lot of these, obviously, you could potentially transfer onto another transit line. But yes, so that was, and that's what all of the equity score as well, looking at, you know, income, race level, you know, the population that would be, well, I don't want to say disproportionately impacted, but, you know, those picking up those communities, that was also then reviewed within a certain buffer of those station locations. Fair enough?
Don't agree with it, but I'll take the word.
Answer my question. Fair enough is an improper question because no, it is not fair because there's no DI communities in Fort Collins.
Well, and that was part of the, so a colleague of mine is the one who was focused on this. That, even though that was listed there, if it didn't affect, you know, Fort Collins would not score high then on this equity score in that element. Greeley perhaps did, and I would have to look back at the analysis piece on that.
The equity score is really high because that's where the drop off.
Census blocks indicate.
Yes.
And it's our lowest disproportionately impacted.
Right. Right.
The only one is the hospital one. That surprises me. But if it has to do with distance.
Distance is what the big driver was were those stops in a location that somebody could really walk to. And honestly, we weren't seeing a lot of that with any of these.
Yeah, because the MCR you wouldn't necessarily walk to either. As a hospital, that's in the middle. That's totally drivable area, right? But no one's gonna walk there.
But I mean, if it takes that loop, they probably could. I mean, it would drop off near there.
Yeah, the loop, I agree with the number 5, it was the loop one, to drop off at West Terra, to drop off in different locations.
Some of the scoring also to clarify, you know, the we had to do some normalization and adjustments for the number of stops along each of these routes. Otherwise, you know, the Fort Collins to Loveland Loop, which has 4 different stops in Loveland, Fort Collins, would elevate to the top. So it's sort of a standard practice to account for the fact that that has more stops, and you know, the cost then also increases with that service as well. Any other questions regarding this?
I'm going to pause. I have neglected the folks online. I am sorry about that, Councillor Mellon. I know you had a question. If you would kindly ask any questions that are pertinent right now to Mr. Chase's presentation, and then Troy, I'll loop back around to my comments here when Mr. Chase is done. But anybody online with questions for Ian, please?
Can you hear me now, Scott?
Hang on, we're trying to get to you.
It should come through my computer.
Can you hear me now, Scott?
There we go. We got you.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
All right. Well, I was wondering, I had 2 questions for this gentleman. One, I was trying to understand, I couldn't hear what Johnny's question was about Greeley, and I kind of went, why is Greeley falling down so low in the scoring? Can you hear me?
So
No, you mute.
yeah, sorry, we're getting a little bit of an echo here. Okay. He really sort of fell to the bottom because we just weren't actually seeing the trips between Greeley and Cheyenne. Um, the analysis did not find a strong demand there, and that was the principal reason that Greeley fell to the bottom. The other alignments, either directly to Fort Collins, which has this proximity and was showing a much higher origin destination trip pattern, really is what elevated Fort Collins. And then the Loveland, Centera communities had a, a, a greater number of trips to Cheyenne, to and from Cheyenne, than Greeley, but then it also had a much higher vocal public support. Really, those alignments that were directly to Fort Collins or hitting Loveland and hitting the I-25 corridor were the alignments that the vast majority of the public and public comments that they supported.
Troy, hang on just a second. We have to mute here and then have.
Okay. So my second question, it's kind of a 2-parter. Who was this? Who among this? Who were the Cheyenne stakeholders that you worked with?
Leads, obviously the Cheyenne NPO was a big part of the project. They were the partner driving most of the project. I can't recall all of the different stakeholders up there, but we had business community members that were also on the guidance committee. I believe we had one gentleman who was from the Air Force Base, the transportation planner at the Air Force Base, who was also a member.
Was anybody from the,
Hang on, Troy.
was anybody from the veterans organization, the Veterans Hospital in Cheyenne included? I ask because this area, the North Front Range NPO falls within um, the area that the Cheyenne Hospital covers for veterans.
Yes, yes, we did have, we had stakeholder interviews, and the Cheyenne VA, there was a representative for them.
And did you have a listing of the potential stops that were going to be in Cheyenne? Did you have a list of the potential stopping points in Cheyenne?
Yeah, so there were multiple areas that that one slide illustrated the different focus areas in Cheyenne that we were interested in. The really the bulk of the analysis was focused, I shouldn't say wasn't focused on the different areas within Cheyenne, but we really had a broad area in the North Front Range that we focused on. Cheyenne always had a trip end within it, and it became pretty clear rather quickly that the best option in Cheyenne would be that downtown area, which and the transit center there, which would connect to local transit throughout the community. There is the option moving forward to consider optional stops within Cheyenne. And a couple of those stops that were considered is the north of the airport in Cheyenne, and I forget the street that is. But north of Cheyenne, there was South Greeley and the higher ed location in South Greeley. There was also consideration of maybe adding another stop that would go to the Air Force Base. All of those were discussed. And at this level, this high level analysis where we're trying to identify an alignment that can then move forward into more detailed analysis, we just didn't get to that point. Does that answer your question?
Answers my questions, yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Mark Clark. I have a question.
Go ahead, Mark.
I understand that you spoke to a representative at F.E. Warren Air Force Base there. However, there's a large presence of Air National Guard members that also work up there. Over 40% of the people up there commute from the Greeley, Evans, Fort Collins, Loveland area. I was wondering why they were not included in this, feasibility study.
We missed the beginning of your question as we're switching to muting different locations. The we had a very broad stakeholder interview process, and we did interview the transportation director, I believe was his title, that was at the Air Force Base, and we did gather some information on the travel patterns for yes, service members that do travel to and from the Air Force Base. There were a broad array of users and stakeholders that we did touch base with.
Okay, I was just wondering because the Air National Guard, separate from the Air Force Base, you know, a lot of us, myself included, over 40% of us just commute back and forth between, you know, the Fort Collins, Loveland, you know, Greeley, Evans area, and it sounded like it was just F.E. Warren. I was just making sure that the Air National Guard was included in that because that's where a large part of the commuters come from.
Well, as I said before, yes, we tried to gather as much information as we could. We also, as I mentioned, the data that we collected that was big data that's following origin destination patterns, that also, I mean, that's inclusive of both regions completely, and so should take into account where various people reside and where they're traveling to for work. So that's a big element. That was probably the biggest element in all of this. Whether or not there was direct communication between all the potential users, I mean, we did the best that we could in our stakeholder engagement.
I mean, but ultimately, most of the
Okay.
trips are between Cheyenne and
Exactly right. I mean, and that's what the data was telling us is Cheyenne to Fort Collins is the greatest connection.
And I would probably agree with
Yeah, I would
that.
agree with that, absolutely.
I'm not gonna
Yeah,
disagree
don't argue
with
with that.
that Cheyenne to Fort Collins is probably the greatest number of trips. But that's not what I don't think that's the question we're asking.
Johnny, what's interesting is my frustration on this lies, and there's no doubt that that's where the trips are. No doubt about that in my mind. But I would be fascinated to see that which you identify demographically, psychographically as transit friendly. When you say, okay, as my grandpa used to say, we're going fishing where the fish are, you identify where the fish are, and that has a certain demographic, psychographic makeup. I'd love to see what's in that population subset, because my guess is those who are overly identified as transit friendly don't necessarily share a 100% commonality. I'd be curious if they shared a 50% commonality with actual disproportionately impacted communities. And then my point being is we are doing a lot in the state legislation and otherwise to try to impact disproportionately impacted communities when they may not be transit friendly. That's my hypothesis right now, but I'm not smart enough to prove it. So I'm really curious as to, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
We're
and I don't
trying
think
to.
we're arguing this. I mean, if I lived in Cheyenne and I wanted to go out and I wanted to be somewhere, the amenities in Fort Collins are greater than the amenities in Loveland. I mean, Greeley. Sorry, Loveland. I wasn't speaking Greeley. I don't know why I said that. But it's the data points. It's the data set, right? It's
Yeah. What's in that data set?
It's the macro and micro data that's in there. That I think I don't want to belabor this, but I don't think we're arguing. The bus from Cheyenne to Fort Collins, we agree, we'll go there.
So I guess ultimately then good work, and I think what we can derive from it is there is a demand to launch this kind of service, but what are we utilizing that is a tool, and it may not be necessarily the tool that we need to solve the disproportionately impacted community problem is my point. I think you've got demand without a doubt. I think you probably have got one that's feasible, even that would be economically sustainable. But I don't think the two will meet as far as using this opportunity to service a disproportionately impacted community. Just
Sure.
kind of a theory.
I don't know if so I think that there's, you know, I don't know for sure on the census. Census data is determining the disproportionate impacted communities? Because I mean, I think North College is probably where our disproportionately impacted communities are. In Fort Collins for sure, and some around the university, honestly.
There was a map CDOT presented a while back. There was some small pockets there.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're not taking that away. There was small pockets of disproportionately impacted communities.
I wouldn't doubt Fort Collins that existed 10 years ago, but
From
I mean-
34 south in Weld County, though, is a disproportionately impacted community.
I think that everything together, I mean, it's so obviously we're not just looking at one score, we're looking at
I don't
the
think,
aggregate.
again, the Fort Collins bus is probably the,
Right.
just gut feel, it's the right answer. I just think the data here is very confusing. You know, it almost looks like it's forced into an answer, even though that's the right answer. I do have a second question though. There's a new transit hub being formed off I-25, which may be more interesting, as in the future being service to Denver, service to Cheyenne, maybe being a central, hub. I mean,
And you're talking about the one at Centera
Kendall
or
Parkway.
Kendall Park? Yes.
and I mean, right now it's not open, and right now Fort Collins is definitely serving that purpose, but just for this route in particular, just shooting it up and down I-25 for efficiency and everything, creating a hub, is that even considered? Trying to align it all onto a hub system.
Well, alignment 3 or 2 or 3 you may have seen was along I-25 and hitting the park and ride Harmony, and then ending at that US 34 park and ride until or after, and then the actual hub at Kendall Parkway. That would be that connection point.
Instead of, at that point, what do you consider again, just down there, not on the freeway, but you could drive a lot, local crews could drive their buses there to pick up.
Right. I'll point out also that, this is looking at, okay, what would this alignment be? How would it connect to the rest of the system? Moving forward, the recommended alignment, and who's actually providing the service, there was discussion that the Mustang, the North Line, what could we just continue that so that you don't have to do, so that you don't have to do that transfer, right? And I mean, that makes sense. That's something that'll have to be hashed out as we move forward. Yeah. Jan Rowe, who is at DTR, CDOT, and I don't know if he's on.
He's been chatting with, like, Troy has been asking some questions, and so he's been
Yeah,
answering some of those questions.
Jan was the representative for CDOT throughout the whole process. Yeah. And so definitely that was all considered and discussed.
Folks online, we have a definitive eye on the chat now. Sorry for that, but we've got you. And because of our funky microphone problems here, I'm just going to ask that if you do have a question, rather, please type it into chat and we'll get to you. So I'd ask if there are any further questions for Mr. Chase. We have grilled this poor gent far enough. It's time to get on to grill. I want to grill Andy Karzian now. I mean, that's.
Do you want to go back to the presentation?
Oh yeah, they were not even done their slides yet. Okay. What? There's more grilling?
I'm excited for it. Excited might not be the word. Okay, thank you. Alex got us to this slide. The recommended alignment, I mean, the reason this one, floated to the top, the connectivity, it hit the, some of the major hubs, activity centers. It does serve the highest trip pattern that we were observing. It was well supported by both the guidance committee, the stakeholders, and the public in general. It did serve high transit user communities that we had identified, and the environmental score honestly, none of the alternatives really provide a high environmental score. There were not a lot of medical facility, VA facilities within the buffers around those zones, those stop locations. And the amount of riders that you would expect on a transit service, starter service such as this, really doesn't pull enough single occupant vehicles off the roadway to warrant giving any of these alternatives more than a quarter pie there, basically. So the final recommended alignment is the Fort Collins to Cheyenne. The dashed section at the south there is yet to be determined. It could go along US 287 and State Highway 1 to Wellington, and there's an optional stop location there. As I had mentioned before, we were seeing a high number of origin destination trip patterns between Wellington and Cheyenne. And then another option, sticking to I-25, coming across Mulberry, and then potentially having a stop or two along that Mulberry corridor. Service model discussion. So I'll dive into this and try and move through this quickly. We did analyze and consider various technologies, and we did screen through those. Basically, we came to the point that the regional express bus really does fit this type of transit service the best. The length of the route, the ability to provide comfort and the various amenities on a express bus fit this route well. And you know, a couple of the key points here: short-term implementation is relatively easy when you compare this to rail, and this service is flexible. You can observe take some data, see how ridership is, and if it is not hitting the mark, maybe there's an adjustment. Try changing a stop location or adding an optional stop here or there. The proposed service plan, we did work with CDOT, DTR to help focus on an initial service plan. This was similar to what they've done with Bustang. We're looking at 12 round trips on the weekdays and 8 round trips Saturdays, Sundays. The time of day, we did not get into that at this level. That will come in the next steps. It is you obviously want to hit those peak travel periods, but a little more analysis to look at the midday or early late travel patterns would help define when those trips would be occurring.
Did you have projected ridership?
Can you speak up? They can't hear online.
Did you have a projected ridership?
That was not part of the scope. Really, we focused on what is going to provide the best, the highest number. We didn't really refine and get to a point of saying this is what you can expect. I can say, we are thinking it would be a couple hundred, hopefully, per day for this sort of service. And then the operating cost estimate, some assumptions here on the travel speed, layovers, the cost per revenue hour. We used a CDOT Bustang number there, $160. And in the lower right, you can see the annual gross operating cost came out at about $1.5 million. And I will just cover next steps briefly here. The key point moving forward is identifying a project champion. Cheyenne NFRMPO. This is really about connecting them. They want to be a part of transit along the Front Range and connecting to Colorado. So identifying that project champion to continue this across the line over the next couple of years is key. Identifying potential providers, finalizing that transit service plan, like I touched on. A more detailed cost estimate is critical, and then planning and governance issues, and then identifying potential funding sources. And then this last step just sort of discusses that funding, those funding steps. You know, I want to touch upon the planning and governance. Defining partnerships for this project is critical. Getting those letters of support is critical in order to move forward. There are some various funding sources. You all know about the funding sources, federal, local, and then hopefully identifying some funding grants that can support this system. And that's it. I believe I went over my 15 minutes.
It's our fault, not yours. Questions for Mr. Chase, please.
One of the things that I would recommend, if Jan can hear me, I think this is a perfect outrider Mustang kind of approach that fits their new model of
Absolutely.
transportation that really connects communities. Interstate, by the way. It's not. It's outside of our state even. And I think it's a good stop. I'm not saying it's not. I mean, that's not what we're saying. It's the destination center. That's what we call them in the city, right? Destination center.
Yeah.
To go to.
Yeah.
But I think Mustang needs to be very highly considered, because putting the burden of that on Fort Collins or Greeley, or Greeley's out because it's not part of our service area, but it'd be hard because we do have the Pioneer Express between Fort Collins and Greeley, so we can connect and we can make that work. But at the end of the day, it's a state function.
Okay, additional questions? Thank you very much.
Certainly.
So next time, know when you come here, 15 minutes means an hour. All right.
So did you want to circle back to?
Yeah, Troy, let's circle back. Do you have comments to the way back when we were talking about legislation? And give us a second. Don't hop right in. We got to mute and switch.
Well, Suzette was explaining about the amendment that just passed in the State House. And the commissioner had some comments about it, but no one could hear her. And I was wondering what the comments were, because she sounded fairly passionate about that.
Just a loss of.
Okay, go ahead.
Good.
I think we would just be losing money from our transportation pot. So, I mean, when you think of transportation kind of as a whole across the state, I mean, it's going to be $1.5+ million a year that we're going to lose by making the delivery fee only applicable to businesses that make over $500,000 a year. So that
I'm
just
sorry.
is,
I,
it is
I'm
what it
sorry.
is. I don't think there's anything that we're going to be able to do about that necessarily, but I mean, I know people on the enterprise aren't happy.
I'm sorry. We
And it's
couldn't
money
hear
that goes
you.
to our communities, right? I mean, we're in a non-attainment area. We would have seen some of those dollars come in. There's fewer of those dollars to come into our community.
Did you hear that, Troy?
Only the last few sentences.
Okay.
No, I didn't hear that. Only the last few sentences that I hear.
Okay. Let's move on, please. Presentation number 12 is Front Range Passenger Rail. Mr. Karzian, I'm sorry, we're only 35 minutes overdue. It's not too bad, and Jim as well. So
He's used to being down at the legislature.
yeah.
He knows how this works.
And did Jim go ahead?
Thank you all very much. Can you hear me? All right. I will go through this fairly quickly. I don't have the level of specificity that our former presenter had in regards to the Front Range Passenger Rail. However, I'm really excited to be here today to speak to you all kind of about what the district is doing. Shout out to my board member, Johnny Olson, who's sitting there with you as well. He's involved. So he can take all of the difficult questions, and I'll just do the presentation since you're there in the room, Johnny. All right. So let's see. Am I sharing my screen, or do you all have my? I can share if I can, I think. Can you all see that? That works. All right. So what we have today, we're going to go. I'm just trying to maximize it. We're going to talk about the Front Range Passenger Rail, where we're at, and probably take about 10 minutes is my goal here. So some of the key points we're going to talk about: Front Range Passenger Rail update, goals and visions, looking at our service development plan, plus a brief conversation about the corridor identification program, which is a federal program that the district will be applying for here in March, and then taking a look at some of the partnerships that we're working through as part of the district. So our goals and visions, as you know, is to build an interconnected transportation backbone along the Front Range for passenger rail, linking the communities and the markets along the Front Range, build, maintain, operate a passenger rail line along the Front Range as soon as possible. There's a lot of conversations about the timelines. We're looking at around 2 to 4 years before getting a ballot measure in front of the voters in regards to state funding, voter approved state funding. However, prior to that, we're going to be going to some of those federal dollars that I mentioned earlier. The service development plan is something that we are currently working through. This is a legislative requirement for the district to create a lot of the information that our former presenter just discussed. So what we will be doing is going through the modeling and clarifying a lot of the, identifying a route. Right now we have 3 routes, 3 alternatives that we are taking a look at, and going through some of the fatal flaws on those alternative routes for the passenger rail, plus just taking a look at these variety of different portions of the service development plan that we will be going through. The challenge that we're facing with the service development plan is that we are working in collaboration with the Federal Rail Administration. And while the Front Range Passenger Rail District may be a little bit further ahead than some of the other folks around the country who are going to be participating in developing passenger rail corridors, that doesn't necessarily translate to a more expedited review process for the FRA. And so we are putting in our service development plan. For example, the first chapter, if you will, is the purpose and need. We just got that blessed by the FRA. So we will be moving on to the next phase. And then once that phase is blessed, we'll move on to the next phase. So it's a somewhat tedious process that takes the time, but we're hoping that this service development plan will be able to provide us that information that we need in order to make good policy decisions on the rail. The CIDP is the federal grant program that the Front Range Passenger Rail District is going to be trying to leverage in order to accomplish some of the outcomes for the passenger rail. The Corridor Identification Program is part of the IIJA bill that passed from the federal government, dedicated a lot of dollars for the development of passenger rail nationwide. We meet all of the eligibility requirements. As I mentioned, right, we're a little bit ahead of the rest of the pack because of previous work that has been done by a group you all probably have heard from before, the Southwest Chief Front Range Rail Commission. The Front Range Passenger Rail District is the successor organization to that commission. And so we, by law, took on their resolutions. And one of the things that they identified was this service development plan, which we're going through right now. Next steps, application. We are going to apply to be part of this so the CIDP in by March 27th. And so we're working on that application right now. There are different tranches of funding that will come available with the CIDP. And very briefly, we are used to, from the transportation infrastructure granting world, going for a CRISI grant or going for a Fed State Partnership grant or going for a X, Y, or Z grant, kind of one-off grants. The exciting thing about this CIDP program is it's an umbrella program that has dedicated grant funds inside of it. So we will be working just with the CIDP program for CRISI funds or federal state partnership funds that have been already dedicated for passenger rail in Colorado and around the country. So that's exciting, kind of a more efficient way of getting directly to the passenger rail dollars. So that's where the appropriations of funds will be. The first tranche will be this year, about $500,000, kind of a starter fund for these kinds of efforts, similar to the FRPR, what's going on. And then the next tranches are leveraging state dollars or local dollars, which we hope for and intend to. It's a 90-10 split, so we can draw down quite a bit of federal dollars if we're able to leverage some at the state level. And that ties into that third bullet point. So move on. Did I go too far? Nope. Okay, so partnerships. We're working with the partnerships similar to what you talked about before with the transit study. Cheyenne and New Mexico, Wyoming and New Mexico are on the board. They're also part of the conversations. Ideally, the district will expand up into Cheyenne and down in New Mexico. Those are later phases to be sure, but it's definitely part of the intent. And then as an operator, what we're thinking and what we're been discussing is having Amtrak come in and be the operator for Front Range Passenger Rail. The main reason for this would be, of course, that they have that statutory interest on being able to operate on rail lines, freight rail lines. As I mentioned, Wyoming and New Mexico are part of the board, and we're continuing to have conversations with them, trying to develop as much of a market to link to them as much as possible. And there's my contact info. So, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to now start the grilling.
Sorry, there's not much meat there, Andy. I don't know whether I'm grillable here. Any questions in the room for Andy, please, or online, please? If you would type it in real quick, and then we'll come to you if you do.
Working on the Gmail thing.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, Andy, we're good, sir. Thank you so much for waiting a little bit extra. Oh, Troy had a question. I'm sorry. I did not see.
Is Amtrak allowed to use the rail lines on small railroads, or are they limited to just the major carriers?
Yeah, great question, because that question ties into the conversations that we're having with RTD and what do we do with the commuter rail down around in Northwest Rail and all of that area. So to answer your question is yes, there are areas around the country where Amtrak does operate commuter and passenger rail, and they're different. Commuter rail, as you know, is Federal Transit Administration, and then passenger rail is the Federal Rail Administration. But that's the hope, is that we would be able to have one operator to manage some of the commuter rail and passenger rail coming up north.
I was thinking more along the lines of a couple of short line railroads that we have in the North Front Range, and whether or not Amtrak is allowed to use those.
That's a great question. So for a private railroad, my hunch is yes, because my hunch is yes. Now, with that assumption comes there would have to be a lot of outreach and collaboration and work with that private railroad in order to accommodate the any Amtrak trains that were part of the new service on that rail. So
Thanks. That's a
Council.
So I'm just gonna throw it out there. I told Andy to be ready for the question, but this group got off the game after the last one, so I'm gonna bring it up anyway. One of the things that,
Louder.
One of the things that I think is important for this team to know is Will and I have been sitting on that committee, and we are both in lockstep, stock and barrel about Weld County and the district. So I just want to let everybody know sort of where we're at. Weld County has voiced their concerns that if the train goes up the US 287 line and it's not in Weld County, it would be difficult for Weld County to support a tax increase in a county that's probably not going to be used. And I think the Front Range Passenger Rail is on board. With that being said, the studies are going to also include 85. And I do not, and I made this point very clear, that Weld County wants to be part of the board in the district, because there might be a day where Weld County gets a train into their communities, but we don't know about the taxing side of the discussion. So that's on the board knows it, and Andy's been working that with us on those discussions. So I just wanted to put it out there.
Okay. But and Will and Johnny and Andy too, that's if indeed you take it to the voter to tax within that district, it's statutory. You would have to run a piece of legislation to take Weld County out, would you not?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to go back to the legislature.
I'm sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, that's it. Yes. The answer is yes. Yeah. And I apologize if my other board member, Mayor Karsbeck, is there too. I didn't see him.
Anything else for Andy, either online or in the room, please? Seeing none, sir, you are free to go. Thank you, Andy. We appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you all.
Okay. Let's move on to consent items. This is number 13, fourth quarter 2022 unaudited financials. Is Rachel presenting on this?
No.
No, it is. That's what I thought. It's a report. And this is consent items. So I guess I need a motion to approve the consent.
Yes.
Okay. So I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, please.
I'll second.
Motion and second to approve the consent item. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
For all of you that are further out, particularly you, Commissioner, speak up louder. They can't hear you.
Okay, discussion item number 14 is the North Front Range MPO 10-year list 2050 RTP update. Becky, you're going to have to come sit by me, please. Or by
Hope we're not
Suzette.
making you guys nauseated with this. two dresses that look alike.
Didn't coordinate. Yes. So, 10-year pipeline of projects. So if you recall, and I'm not sure how many of you remember what we did back in 2019 and where this all came from, but back in 2019, CDOT started developing their 10-year list of projects, or their 10-year pipeline of projects, to go into their 2045 statewide plan. And so they asked all of the MPOs and TPRs to work with them and to develop their own lists. And so we as the MPO developed our own. Let's see if this works. Oh, whoop, went too far. Okay, there we go. So we came up with our own list of corridors to go into the list of projects. So we started off with all of our regionally significant corridors as a starting point. And at the end of 2019, Council approved 6 priority corridors, and you can see those on the slides there. I-25, US 34, US 85, US 287, State Highways 14 and 392 as being regionally significant, going between communities, as well as going outside of our MPO region to other parts of the state. And so we held a workshop to examine projects on those 6 corridors, and there were 57 projects total, to come up with what the tier 1 list looked like for roadway projects. And so we went through with voting. All of the council members were there. All of the TAC members were also there. Went through a dot voting exercise. We only ended up needing to do 1 round to come up with the list of projects. We also did non-motorized and transit lists as well. And so we then updated the list in early 2021, and then again in 2022, based off of CDOT requests. And there were actually quite a lot of projects that were able to come off the list in the January 2022 update. And so just as a little bit of a refresher, these are the criteria that the TC adopted for this list the first time around. So in 2019 and into 2020, these are the criteria that they were using, the TC, to put projects into the statewide list. And so TAC went through these as well as council and agreed that we would use these along with a couple of other ones under the regional priority section to come up with the projects so that our projects in the North Front Range region would be eligible for consideration into the statewide list. And in 2021, the TC updated theirs criteria, and the red outlines, which are kind of hard to see from here, but online I'm sure you can see, the ones that are in red are the criteria that they either updated or added. So they added social equity, GHG, as well as inclusion and diversity, I believe. So this very easy to see chart is the list of projects that we came up with. So what we did in 2021 or 2022, I apologize, was we came up with two lists, and one was with a P3 and one was without a P3, because this was in response to the unsolicited proposal that was submitted to CDOT and at the time HPTE, now CTIO. And so what we did was we developed a list that said, okay, if there isn't a P3, these are our priorities. And so you can see I-25 is featured on there quite a few times, and those projects are on there. And then we also said, well, if there is a P3 and this proposal goes forward, these are then, of those projects, these are what our priorities are. And so as you can see, I-25 came off of that list. Conveniently enough, the TC took action with the segment 5 project funding that through the 10-year state's 10-year plan. And so with the P3 is actually a good starting point for us moving forward into the 2050 RTP, because that project and those projects have been funded through the 10-year plan through the state. So, so what I did was I requested TAC members and project sponsors review this list, provide any updates to the list. So why now? We're doing this now to ensure that our 10-year list continues to reflect our region's priorities and continues to remain a living document, which is the reason that we have continued to update it since you first adopted it in 2020. This is also to ensure that the Tier 1 projects are still the priorities of the region as we go into the 2050 RTP. And we want to incorporate the most current list into our upcoming RTP, which is currently under development and is scheduled for adoption by this body in September. Yeah.
Let's pause right there. If we could, where's our mic runner? You got it now? Okay.
Getting tired.
I know he is.
Get a sense.
Okay, Councilor Mellon, you have a question. Give us just a second and go ahead.
Muted.
And Councilman Mellon, can you hear us? Says can now. So, okay.
Okay, Troy, we cannot hear you, sir. Try again. I didn't say anything. So you don't have a question?
Here we go. This, okay. So this is the list of projects based off of, starting with the with P3 list. And then this is the list of projects with comments from the project sponsors of where we are in the process, or where they are and what the updated costs are as well. So this is the list of tier 1 projects as it stands. And I'm just going to walk through these. There's 2 more lists. I just want to walk through the 2 of them, and then if possible, take questions after that. So I also asked project sponsors to look at the transit list. And so as you can see, the US 85 Eaton to Denver has been removed because it's by the project sponsor, because it is moving forward. There was a request to remove the Front Range Regional Rail. Did not move that. It's there right now. And then as you can see, the Loveland to Estes Park is a potential pilot that the NPO went to Estes Park last month, yes, to start the discussions with that. And then finally is a non-motorized list, and this one is the list that just keeps on shrinking, and we don't actually have any tier 3 projects. In fact, all of the tier 3 projects were funded through other means, not necessarily through 10-year plan funds, but through other grant opportunities that project sponsors went and pursued. So these are the 3 lists that we have as they stand, with comments from the project sponsors. And my main question is, are these the priorities, the priority corridors that were selected in 2019, still the Planning Council's priorities?
And those are in priority order?
Yes, those are the order that they have been prioritized in, yes.
So it's I-25, 34?
Yes, it's, so, yeah, sorry, it's, yeah. 25, 34, 85, and then 287, 14, and 392. So the first question is, are these corridors still the priority corridors of the council?
Consensus
Yeah, I think so.
is with me, yeah. Yes.
Okay. So then if that is the case, are the tier 1 projects, and when I say tier 1, I mean the roadway projects, still the priorities of the planning council? There we go. So are these projects still the top priority projects? Or are there other projects that council thinks are higher priority? Not necessarily the order, just the projects that are on the list.
Not much changes around here.
Item 3, I think I should say Greeley, Windsor, Weld, and Johnstown.
Or for 34, it's Kit 17.
The 17, the first one?
I think both
That
of them.
one? Okay. And the one that's at the bottom too? Okay.
Yeah.
We can make that change.
Because it's all, that's a
Yeah.
community.
It's really well, yeah, on the Wellcote side. It's really well at Windsor, Johnstown.
Johnstown's not annexed after, but it is in the planning area.
And Kersey, if Christian's on.
And so then if the answer to both of these is yes, I'm going to guess that the answer to the third one is no, but I'm still going to ask. Does Planning Council feel there's a need for another work session to prioritize regional 10-year plan projects for any of the lists, for any of the 3 lists? Is there a need to revisit the tier 2 and tier 3 list? They just went through the 3 lists that you see that I put in here.
And they were,
Changes?
There were a couple of suggestions, and I don't know who they came from off the top of my head. I heard back from not everyone, just a few communities, to move some projects, specifically a 392 project from the tier 2 or tier 3, I can't remember right now, I believe it's tier 2 list, up to tier 1.
I was going to ask if 392 Windsor County Road 13 all the way out to I-25, but I mean, that might, I know it's a lower priority roadway, but that's a pretty strategic need with a good river bridge and the 3-way.
So
I hate to speak for Windsor, Paul's not here.
I do think it's hard to have the conversation. I mean, Loveland's not here, Fort Collins is not here, Paul's not here. I mean, there seem to be enough people missing that I would hate to say definitively yes. I mean, I guess if TAC looked at it and people are fine with it, but I mean, that, it is a little troublesome to have some major communities missing from this conversation.
You know, I think the priorities remain the same. That would be Commissioner Stevens and the fact that the projects, perhaps we can suggest this. And you and Suzette email out the project list and ask for input by next NPO.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think really it's the US 34, but anybody that tries US 34, 83rd Avenue is going to be a strong, we're going to start evaluating that pretty heavy. It's got a temporary signal. See it on some RTD, maybe it's a little temporary signal. So 83rd Avenue is going to be a critical connectivity. We're starting to get development, and major development along that area between 71st and 83rd. So
And that goes across then onto Two Rivers, doesn't it?
it is the connectivity to US 85
Yeah.
from Weld County up. It's a strategic corridor, Weld County, Greeley, and folks that move to Denver. I don't know if anybody's ever been on Two Rivers in the peak hour, but it's probably close to 10,000 cars a peak hour.
So birthday movie.
So one of the things we did last time when we initially prioritized these corridors, the council made a decision at that point that you wanted to focus on a corridor and not necessarily a project to get. So we did, you all agreed to that on I-25. Do you want to follow that same pattern as we move off of I-25 and onto US 34? And the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's sort of, I mean, then it makes the projects important, but not as important on the list, because then if there's money, then we can start talking about, you know, is the list that has the number 6 can take the money, because it's the 34 corridor is the goal, not necessarily each individual project. Does that make
I mean,
sense?
I think that for sure would be something I'd want to have more discussion about. I mean, I'm intrigued by it, but I also would like to talk to our staff and make sure that Fort Collins and Loveland and other folks would be part of that. So could that be incorporated into the ask in the email that you send out?
Yeah, I'm bringing.
Was that asked of TAC?
I agree, but I think it likely will be, but I agree with the process. That's your feedback.
I don't think TAC was asked about that.
Just about the
Yeah, and so every area has done it differently. Like in
Sure.
Dr. Cog, for example, they sort of spread the money around, and this council chose to, like, we want to get one thing done, and that's why you focused on
Well,
I-25.
Very successful.
We were laser focused on I-25.
Yes.
I think that, you know, the conversation can look different when we're looking at these other quarters. So I guess I would, you know, maybe or maybe not. But I think it's worth kind of taking that back and having some deeper thought about it.
Okay.
I'm not prepared to say yes right now.
We could do TBD until next meeting. I think that would be good. And send that email out. Let folks know they'll be.
And a strong discussion at staff, and we can talk to our folks too. I'm
Right,
sure that you guys have that discussion, because it's really important that the experts in the room, not the elected, are having that conversation. Did I say that out loud?
Yep, you did.
That's all right.
And then there's still an I-25 project on here that is important.
Yeah.
That we need to make sure it's done.
Okay. Questions for Becky? Thank you. Number 15 to 2050 RTP goals, objectives, performance measures, and targets. Jerome, please.
The next hot seat.
Yeah. I get to show the big kid.
No crayons.
Like Thanksgiving, boy. Darn. The adults table.
Can I make one more comment on that?
Please.
I don't know, we haven't heard what CDOT, because before, we used to present CDOT priorities and what CDOT thought too. So it'd also be nice that we attack CDOT's priorities, because our priorities might not be their priorities, but not that it matters, but it'd be nice to know.
And if there's an editorial comment to be made, I think their 4P process is a little screwy this year. And as we get ready to go through those processes in the communities, I think those are different than what they have been. So they sound like robust listening sessions to me. We know how those have gone in the past. Okay, enough editorial comment. Jerome.
Good evening, everybody. So we are going to be discussing the 2050 RTP goals, objectives, performance measures, and targets. There we go. So first, I'll be referring to it as GOPMT. That is the acronym. And this is used to evaluate our plan and also our transportation system. So first, I just want to clarify so we all are on the same terms what this all means. So goals is referring to the goals addressing the key desired outcomes for the region and are the first step to support our vision statement, which we'll also be discussing. Objectives are needed to support these goals. And the performance measures, as we discussed with the federal performance measures, they are used to establish targets and assess progress towards those goals and objectives. And the targets are those quantifiable numbers that are associated with performance measures. So as we can see, we have the 2045 RTP and the 2050 RTP vision statement. I've provided both for comparison's sake. So for 2045, the vision statement was, we seek to provide a multimodal transportation system that's safe, as well as socially and environmentally sensitive for all users, that protects and enhances the region's quality of life and economic vitality. And then our proposed 2050 RTP vision statement is to ensure the multimodal transportation system in North Colorado is safe, socially and environmentally sensitive, and strengthens the region's quality of life and economic vitality. As you can see, they are very similar. We just shortened it and made it a little bit more snappier. So this vision statement really is meant to describe our vision for our transportation system by 2050. So in a way, this is kind of the backbone of the plan. This is, if we want to describe what our number one goal, what we want on this plan, it will be this statement. So then we're going to go into the goals and objectives. So for our 2045 goals and objectives, we have 4 goal areas. The first goal area is economic development and quality of life. And the corresponding objective is to foster a transportation system that supports economic development and improves residents' quality of life. Our second major goal area is mobility, with a corresponding objective to provide a transportation system that moves people and goods safely, efficiently, and reliably. Goal area 3 for the 2045 RTP is multimodal, with the associated objective being provide a multimodal system that improves accessibility and transportation system continuity. And then the fourth major goal area for the 2045 RTP is operations, with the corresponding objective being optimized operations of transportation facilities. So these are our recommended 2050 RTP goals and objectives. This one being much more for you to look at. And as you can see initially, they are very similar. So goal area 1 is regional health, with the corresponding objective of improve economic development, residents' quality of life, and air quality. We did include air quality in this one. The goal area 2 being mobility, with the associated objective being moves people and goods safely, efficiently, and reliably on a continuous transportation system. Goal area 3 being multimodal, with the corresponding objective being improved accessibility of and access to transit and alternate modes of transportation. And then goal area 4 being operations, with the corresponding objective of optimized operations, planning, and funding of transportation facilities. So here we have a graphic that kind of, it puts it all together. So in this graphic, we can see the performance measures are, for lack of a better word, assigned to a goal. This kind of shows how the whole process is put together. I will note that our GOPMT efforts are included in all of our planning efforts and processes, including in the TIP and for our calls for project. So this is very important for the NPO because we do include it in everything we do to ensure that our transportation system is working the way we would like it to work. So now we're going to move on to our performance measures.
So, ask questions now or later?
You can ask now.
So, when I look at that order, right, when I look at what we exist for, right, I understand regional health is important, economic development, and local communities are very strong in that, right? But at the end of the day, if we're not moving people's safe goods and people safely, that whole regional health thing goes away, right? So I don't know what the order is and the goals that you've selected them and how you selected the order of the goals, but I think we need to today, but have a discussion on what we think the orders of those should be.
Are these in priority order?
Well,
I'm-
go 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's pretty much.
I am not 100% sure.
I don't know. I guess my question is priority, or is it just?
Okay.
Thank you.
The first thing that went to my head is they were, because there's a number associated with it.
We'd like them to be prioritized. Because if the council wants them to be prioritized, it doesn't take a lot of effort. It's able to.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we don't have to have that discussion now. I know there's more to come, but I just.
So for those online that could not hear from the back of the room, they're saying that the council could prioritize these if possible. That's a discussion that we will have further down the road.
Please.
So knowing that we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions because of all is that something we want to include in this? Because I mean, we almost are required to have a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So, I mean, would it make sense to put them in our goals and objectives?
Do we specifically?
Well, they're there whether we put them in or not, I suppose. But I mean, I don't think it's, I mean, that is part of the planning that we're doing is to achieve those goals. So I would be in favor of putting them in.
So there is air quality with the regional health. You want to broaden it.
I mean, I think that air quality can refer to ozone, but even if we solve our ozone problem, I don't think we necessarily solve our GHG issue. So
you defining air quality a little more specifically is what you're asking. Maybe,
yeah, just because I think that, we've always focused on ozone a lot when we're just talking about air quality. But I mean, with greenhouse gas emissions, we're talking about, climate change and some other issues. So.
Okay, we can wordsmith on that.
Quality, I guess.
We can definitely.
And we don't have to decide that tonight, but
it's coming back next month.
We have to do it, right? And so adding it to our goals, I don't think is a bad idea because we're doing it anyway. We're creating plans to do that.
Anna Rose?
Yeah, there is a proposed federal greenhouse gas performance measure that's going through the process. So once that is all finalized, that would be added to this structure.
Oh, okay. Well,
so that's kind of one of the reasons why we didn't pursue it as a regional performance measure is because it's likely that will happen federally required.
Okay.
So for those of you that couldn't hear the back of the room again, Anna Rose was saying that it is likely we will have a federal greenhouse gas standard, and that is why it's not included in this list as a regional standard.
Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, we'll go into our regional performance measures. So for our regional performance measures, we adopted our current performance measures in 2018 prior to the adoption of the 2045 RTP in 2019. So these regional performance measures are designed to reflect our priorities that are not covered by the federal performance measures. And these measures are not required by federal law. It's done in-house, it is done for the region, and we can really do whatever we want with them. I will also note, as we go into more about the targets, this is for the lifespan of the plan. So if we say our target is X, what we are meaning is by 2050, we will reach X. This is unlike the federal performance measures that have a 1, 2, and 4 year period. That being said, we can go into our proposed measures. We have 8 of them. And I will spare you all reading all that because we will be going through each one and going over the proposed target, baseline, the 2045 target, if applicable. We do have some that are new for this RTP, and any comments that may come as part of that.
And going back to Commissioner Stevens' comments, this is a lot of greenhouse gas stuff.
Nary a mention of safety, especially when Vision Zero is all of a sudden the things that we were talking about.
Secretary, the executive director of FHWA is making a priority.
So I want to make sure we're understanding this. So Jerome, is this correct in that what we're proposing here is additional to the performance measures we have? So we already have performance measures that address safety, right? So that's why you're not seeing it on this list. So, is that correct?
Yes, these are in addition to our federal
really required performance measures. But if we do want to include more safety, go more into detail, that is something we can do since this is done for the region and we do not have any legal requirements on what can and cannot be included. So if that is the desire of the council, that's something we can look into. Are they
Question, if we put these in, are we held to these? Because a lot of times with federal law, they give you a minimum requirement that you have to track. And then people go in and add a bunch of other things on it, right? And then if you don't meet them, even if you put them in and they're not federal law, they hold you to the standards that you built, and then they can also hold funds, even though it's not federally required.
I'm not completely sure. My understanding is no. With these, I do not believe we have to report this to FHWA or any federal entity. This is for the NPO, and ultimately the people can decide what happens is the planning council. And that is my understanding.
I would agree with that, and I would also add that I feel like the big way that these performance measures impact planning council and impact local communities is that these are also included in our call for projects. So these are things to work toward and show that your projects are addressing any of these. So a project that doesn't hit all of the federal required or the federal performance measures might do really well with some of these.
Are there any other comments? Hearing none, we will go into each measure itself. So our first measure is population with impaired transit and demand response service area within NFRMPO boundary. This is an existing performance measure. The 2045 target is at least 75% of the population. Our baseline is 63% of the population. Our current status is 68.7%. And our recommendation is to maintain the target from the 2045 RTP, which is at least 75% of the population. And please chime in if you have any questions, concerns as we go through this.
I have a question. So the baseline, to just explain, the baseline current status is we're saying we're 68.7% meeting this. We have a target of 75, but what is the baseline?
The baseline, that is where we're at when the target was established.
In 2045.
I believe so. Some might be prior. It was
Okay.
the first baseline when this target was first introduced.
Okay.
So for the new targets, they will have new baselines, and I do know what those years are for the new targets.
Okay. So we're making progress, is what you're saying.
So we are making progress on
Okay.
this one. So for our next one, we have fixed route revenue hours per capita within service areas. The 2045 RTP target is increased by 10% of the baseline. I will note, because I was not really sure what these numbers meant when I first saw it, those are ratios, and how it's calculated is revenue hours divided by population. So that's what the 0.65 and 0.45 refer to. So our baseline is 0.65. Our current status is 0.45. And for this one, the larger the number, the better. So we are not going in the right direction, but we are recommending to maintain the target. And that is because we do have, well, one, the pandemic did have a major effect on this, which that is going to be a very common sentiment, is a pandemic kind of threw a wrench in a lot of things. I'm sure that's not news to anybody. But we can assume that it will go up. We are already seeing additional transit projects, as what we saw with the Colorado-Wyoming feasibility study, like NOCO and other projects throughout the region. And we can assume that there will be a little bit of a bounce back as we continue to move out of the pandemic. So our next measure is non-motorized facility miles. I will note what that refers to is bike lanes, sidewalks, and multi-use trails. Our 2045 target was increased by 50% of the baseline, which I believe is a little over 5,000 miles. Our baseline is 3,352 miles. Our current status is 4,586 miles. So we are recommending to increase that to 6,500 miles. And that is because we have made significant progress since the baseline was created. Some of that could just be better data. When we were developing the active transportation plan, of course, we dug more into this. So it's very possible that the baseline was undercounting. But even with that, we're getting, with the target 425 being around 5,000, and we are only 500 miles away from that target, we could reasonably assume that we can increase that.
My 2 cents worth on this target is it's self-serving. What do you hope to accomplish by increasing the non-motorized facility miles? I think that can be tied directly back to VMTs and to greenhouse gas reductions. So rather than just saying, hey, look at us, we built 2,000 more miles of facility, of non-motorized facility miles. Let's make sure that we have a greenhouse gas metric that's associated with that. Again, here I am asking for bang for our buck. What is a return on the taxpayer's investment?
And then I guess I would like to say that what is sort of the best practice of percent, like, I mean, where do we get 6,500 miles from? So, I mean, what is it, if we have like a certain percent of miles per capita, I mean, is there like a standard that we were trying to hit here? Or are we just like, hey, we're doing good, let's just bump it up?
I think it's all based on the baseline. We were here, we wanted to increase by 50%. I think so the baseline came in and whatever it was back then, that's a new baseline, right?
So that is the original baseline for whenever this was.
When we started the performance measure, I think it's based on 50% increase on the baseline. So we said we want to increase those. Now, I don't know if there's a national standard if you have so many miles of sidewalk trails or things like that, but I mean, you think about 6,500.
No, I think it's a great
miles.
goal, but I'm just like, I feel like there again, it might be good to say, yeah, we're trying to get, that for every, person in our community, we have two miles of, I don't know, I don't know, I'm just saying that, like, is there any way to, I get that increasing by 50% is a good goal, but so is increasing by 75% or 60%. So, I mean, increasing any percent is good.
Yeah.
So, like, is there a goal we want to get to where we're like, yes, there's clearly we want sidewalks in communities so people can get safely to school and there. But what do we need to? I don't know. I guess.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that you want to sort of see not what's the baseline, but what does that mean? If we say we have 6,500 miles, what does that mean? Does it mean that we have, we're meeting our goal, the goal of building out sidewalks and infrastructure by X percent, or do we need to bump that up to a different percent? I think that's what I'm hearing you say, that you want something that sort of gives you more of a number of a tangible target, because 6,500 miles doesn't really tell you anything about what that means.
What's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Back to the,
yes.
All right, for every mile of non-motorized facility that we build, we reduce VMTs by X. We reduce greenhouse gas by X. Let's look for the tangibility there, as opposed to we build another mile of,
and safety. Like we talk about safe routes to school. Like, are we getting people on these routes where they need to go? So, like, if not, some of them aren't going to the schools, and there's still some schools that are not. Which there are in Fort Collins, some places like around Cougar that are still like not really served as well as they could be. I don't think. I mean, then have we achieved, the goals we want to achieve?
I think the challenge with that, quite frankly, is what is the need? And identifying a need for sidewalks is ever evolving, I think.
Right.
Building a new school, those are always the things that are changing. So I'm going to just throw this out here, and staff may kill me for this.
Don't kill me.
But one of the things that we may consider is that this is a compilation of, this is the non-motorized lane miles that everybody's doing, not just Norfolk Range, but everybody in every region. And I'm sort of looking back there at everybody back there. We also have the non-motorized plan, which is regionally significant trails. You could do this measure just on the regionally significant trails. Like, how much of those regionally significant corridors, non-motorized corridors, are we achieving? And I mean, it's great to see that, everybody in the region. Right, and that may get to your question about, well, what does that mean?
Sure.
And if we say we have these non-motorized corridors, and we got, you know, check, we got one done. Now we got this one, this much done. But we still have here's the need on the rest of these regionally significant non-motorized corridors. I've just throw that out to see if what staff thinks, and they could go from there.
And I was a little nervous for a second. I did look up tangibility, and it is a word. For a second, when I said that, I was like, is that a word? It is. Smart.
It's all about confidence.
This Jackie thinks.
So we'll look at that and just see, either keep what we've got and just say, here's how we measure it, or look at the regionally significant corridors and see if that's something that might make more sense.
Are there any other comments on this before we go on to the next measure? Hearing none, our next measure is percent of non-SOV commuter credits, SOV referring to single occupancy vehicle. So this is an existing measure from the last RTP, or the current RTP, excuse me, and that targets at least 25%. The baseline is 23%. Our current status is 26.8%. We are recommending maintaining at least 25%. And I can already see the questions coming. The justification for that is we did look at from 2013 to 2019 and establishing that trend. And by doing that, we were able to go out and see by 2050, if that trend is correct, it will be at around 20%. And that number is inflated due to the pandemic. As we all know, working throughout the pandemic did change our habits, and we are still trying to see how it will go once what we are phasing out the pandemic. We just don't have the data right now to really know what the trend will be after the pandemic. The most recent year I was able to find for this was 2021. So with that, we just did not feel comfortable to assume that the trends from 2020 to 2021 are going to continue. That is an ever-changing field, and we will see how it goes as we get further and further from 2020 to 2021.
Work from home is changing that.
Yeah, and that's a big factor in it, is work from home. And even with work from home, that's when we get into hybrid, more like hybrid working, they are still going to be commuting, even if it's 1 or 2 times a day, and that will affect this measure. So that is something that we will have to keep track and work towards as we see these trends change as we continue to get out of the pandemic and go into our new normal. Are there any comments on this one? Or I don't want to move too fast.
Okay. You go right ahead and move as fast as you like.
Now, permission, I definitely will. So our next measure, and this one is easy, is daily vehicle mile traveled per capita. The 2045 RTP target is less than or equal to 24. The baseline is 24. Our current status is 24. So we recommend keeping it at less than or equal to 24. There we go. So our next one is projects requiring more than one extension. So what this is referring to is our tip delay review process. These are projects that require more than one extension during that process, and those are the projects that do end up in front of the council that require council approval. If there's only one extension, that only goes towards TAC approval. This is a new target, so we do not have a 2045 target. The 2050 baseline is 11%, and that year is 2019. We chose 2019, 1, because that is the base year of the plan, and 2, the pandemic, you're going to be shocked to hear this, the pandemic definitely affected our delay review. Due to pandemic and supply chain issues, that did cause for there to be more delays. Our current status is 20%, and our recommended target is less than or equal to 22%. That is a little bit higher to take into account possible things like a flood or, God forbid, another pandemic and things of that nature.
So what are we trying to track here? I mean, what's the importance of this? Is it something that has been a problem? Maybe I not recognize this, but what is the purpose for tracking?
I believe the purpose is to track project efficiency. I will
phone a friend because the tip is kind of
They
interesting.
really put you on a bad spot, throwing you up there.
So one of the previous regional performance measures that we had was looking at our projects that were on a federally inactive list, and the way that we saw that play out just didn't really make sense as far as tracking. So one of the goals that we have is like efficiency and project delivery. So this is a way to help us track project delivery. So when we talked about it with our TAC, kind of looking at the processes that we already had in place. So the tip delay review was part of that. So having a goal for the projects that, to like measure it through that process to make sure that we're spending the funds in the region in a reasonable amount of time.
That's my answer.
And the projects that we are tracking and that we do this delay procedure on are the ones that we, the MPO, fund through our calls for projects.
That's my part too.
Yeah, it's just different verbiage than it was when we were trying to get the inactive projects off the list. 350 million back in 2018 and 19.
And I would just say, as I comment, that money is building up again, and the feds are starting to say you need to start getting that money spent.
And now that's a tracking measure that I think we should track.
But we don't.
How often the feds are on your back?
Know how often we're not meeting and getting our expenditures. Projects that it's 10 years. And if you've got money that's sitting in the bank for 10 years, and we're at, and I think the state was at like 350 million in 2018. It was a big number. We're a lower state, but we still had a lot.
Yep.
Are there any other comments on this measure?
I actually like this measure. It's good.
So our next one is travel time index on regionally significant corridors. This is an existing measure. The 2045 RTP target is 90% of regionally significant corridors having a travel time index of less than or equal to 1.5. The 2050 baseline is 90% of RCs have a travel time index of less than or equal to 1.5. Our current status is 94.9%. So we are recommending maintaining that target. And the reason for that is as we all know, our region is growing. So we're going to see more people on the roads that could increase congestion. So while we are above that target now, we can reasonably assume that it could get tighter in the future as we get more commuters, potentially more people commuting down to Denver or moving throughout our communities in the region.
And pandemic.
Yes.
Does everybody understand what the travel time index is? Do you want an explanation?
Can you give me an overview?
Do you want to do that?
Yes. So I'll also know that there is a federal performance measures for travel time index, and that's only for interstate and only for the national highway system. So what this is just bring that down to a more regional level. And let's hope that I remember the explanation I gave to y'all when we discussed this in January. So travel time index, what this is referring to is how reliable our system is. This is not necessarily a measure of congestion. This is what is basically measuring is how long does it take to get from point A to, hopefully I'm doing this right, I'm getting this weird look, from point A to point B, how reliable is that? So for example, no? Okay.
Oh, well, that's what I thought this was, so I'm glad you're asking.
Right.
So it's basically the worst congestion compared to everything works as it's supposed to.
It's basically your level of service.
Yes.
So 1.5 is that on the worst day, it would take you 1.5 times.
1.5 times. Ah, now you're
Yes.
talking.
There you
Okay.
go.
So 1.5 is 1.5 times what, like on I-25, if you were able to go 65, 75 feet away. Imagine going 50.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
45.
So no accidents, complete free flow. You get in, you go home is 1.
Correct.
And then if you encounter difficulties, okay, gotcha.
Right.
Yes. And I'm glad other staff is here.
Like this is saying, like on the worst day, what drone refers to as travel time reliability. So if that happens a lot, that's travel time.
Okay, okay.
I learned something new as well.
Which could affect this too.
Yes, they are. There is a. I don't want to. There is a correlation between the two. They are closely related. Are there any comments on this one?
No, but Medora is saying it's hard to hear Alex, especially without a microphone.
You know, they're the microphone up there.
It was intelligent.
It was really smart. Yes, please.
So this one's another new one, and this is percent of devices connected by fiber on regionally significant corridors. So since this is a new one, we do not have a target. The baseline is 87%, and the baseline year is 2023. So for this measure, we got all of our data from the communities, and it had to be 2023 since we did our first collection this year. Our current status, 87%, and we are recommending the target being greater than or equal to 87%. I will also note the baseline may change as we get more data. I believe most of the data is, and I did send out some clarifying questions. I'm waiting for a few responses. But even if the baseline changes, it's likely that the target will be greater than or equal to whatever the new baseline is. And before approval, I'll be sure to know what that baseline is. I doubt it will change that much, but with data, you never know. Are there any comments on this one? All right. So our next steps at the March TAC meeting, we will discuss and receive TAC recommendation, and then I will be back in April for the April meeting for council action. That is assuming nothing comes up between now and then that makes us have to relook at this. This is assuming that feedback received today is positive and there isn't any major changes I recommended. I will also note that this will all be included in the system performance report, which for the 2045 RTP was a separate document, but for the 2050 RTP, we'll be including it into the document itself, and I will assume will be adopted along with the RTP. With that being said, open up for questions, discussion, comments.
Any questions for Jerome? Seeing none, that's a fine it's a fine presentation, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as we move into council reports, the chair is offering a premium full-size candy bar at the next meeting for anyone who keeps a report under 2 minutes. That yeah, we do have 4 minutes. If you have 2 reports, you have 4 minutes. All right, so we go to Transportation Commission reports. Commissioner Brackey, your favorite premium full-size candy bar is?
Oh, Snickers. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
They can hear you. They're just muted, Kathleen.
Okay, so I'm going to keep this really short. I'll just skip the updates. I think I shared them with a US 34 group and with North I-25 last night. I will check into the question that came up about the amendments to Senate Bill 23-1101. I'll find out more about that tomorrow. So that's all I have. Thanks.
18 seconds. That is a candy bar for you. I will be in touch. All right. CDOT Region 4 update. Director Paddock, please.
Yeah, so I clearly picked the wrong meeting to be virtual. The technology was not in my favor this evening, or many of us on the phone. But just wanted to to comment on a couple things that were stated. CDOT did contribute to the Tier 1 list that the North Front Range pushed out. In fact, we did prioritize those in order and what we thought would be the highest priority, even in the tier 1 list. We also did make recommendation for 392 to get on the tier 1 list. I know Becky was saying someone that made that comment, that was CDOT. As it relates to what is CDOT thinks are high priority projects, well, we did just get done updating the 10-year plan. And so we are currently working with, on those projects. Those projects are funded. We worked with all of our stakeholders to identify what our highest priorities are. And those reside right now on that 10-year plan. So I do understand the tier 1 list with the North Front Range is what I would consider right now an unfunded, but we are seeking funding unconstrained list of projects. I think at one point it totaled about $1 billion. I don't think it's up there anymore, but since segment 5 came off, but we share in the similar priorities as the rest of the North Front Range. We are going to have 4P meetings. They are primarily listening sessions in hopes to make sure that our priorities within CDOT, as with all of our stakeholders, are still in alignment. And as I mentioned earlier in the Upper Front Range, we do have other funding sources that do not land on RTP plans, right? Our resurfacing dollars do not always end up on those big plannings. Our faster safety dollars or our small HSIP dollars. We are looking for quick wins from the communities. We talked about some of the innovations that we have with signals right now, the detection at intersections to really improve the safety. So I'm hoping to get a lot out of the 4P meetings by listening to communities and their concerns and their needs. I don't have a new bucket of money that I can offer to new capital projects, but want to make sure that we are still having the right alignment of our priorities where we spend those dollars with the communities and the counties that we're meeting with. So just to give an update on I-25, I'm not going to win that candy bar, but I do like the $100,000. 7 and 8, just want to say that the frontage road was closed over there on the east side between Johnson's Corner and 402. We are replacing that Hillsborough tributary bridge. So that'll be closed until May 26th. We're also, we're doing a tentative scheduled walkthrough. Well, I should say we're walking through the mobility hub within the next 6 weeks with Centerra to allow them to complete some of the interior finishes. And we have a tentative date of March 11th of 2024 for that to go live. As it relates to segment 6, we are going to be starting a 90-day closure of the southbound off-ramp at Larimer County Road 16, so right there at Johnson's Corner, because we're building that roundabout that'll be on the west side, and that will be closed from April till June. Segment 5, we are progressing right along. We had final interviews today with a consultant selection, or a consultant, so we will be announcing probably a winner here next week. So we'll be moving fast and furious on that. And a lot of good progress is happening out on Peckham and on 85. And we're looking for some good weather to pour the deck, and then expect some paving of new line of the main line, US 85 in April, with a traffic switch occurring after that. And that is my update.
With the 50,
Okay, now go.
with the 56 mobility hub, Heather, do you know when that's scheduled to? I guess it's not even complete. When the bus is scheduled to start? Do we know that yet?
I'm assuming the bus schedule will start, and this is an assumption, but I think someone from DTR could probably clarify. But with that opening on March 11th, that is when service is going to be provided. So our intent is to bring on Mustang service as we open up those express lanes. So those express lanes are going to be open because those are all center loading platforms. We intend to have the bulk of construction for 6, 7, and 8 completed by the end of this calendar year. The start of next calendar year will be all the tolling and testing and integration. And at that time, we're going to open up those mobility hubs and we will start service. And that should include Centerra, Berthoud, and 119 at Firestone.
Questions for Heather, please. Heather, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the stack report that is written. Colorado Transportation Investment Office report is written. I-25 Coalition report. I don't need the candy bar. For the love of God, look at me. But I'll be in and out quick. We had a great meeting last night. We have 5 members from the Senate and the House that are on the I-25 Coalition. 3 of them in attendance last night as far as representatives. It is really heartening to see the Senator Hickenlooper's office represented, Congresswoman Caraveo and Congresswoman Neguse, or Congressman Neguse's office all represented. They are taking note of the I-25 coalition and are participating, and that is greatly appreciated. That being said, we did hear from CDOT and last evening that MEGA has been given the nod by CDOT's executive management to be pursued on North I-25, and that is exciting for me. Now, whether it be a collaboration of Weld County, Elizabeth, or whom actually makes the application, we'll work that out in the wash. But I'm pleased to hear that CDOT executive state team has given us the blessing to pursue MEGA. And that's my report on I-25 coalition. All right, for the first of 2 120-second reports.
I guess I have 3 reports.
3 reports. Oh man, it's 6 minutes. All right.
US 34 Coalition, we just met a few hours ago. We discussed the Transportation Management Organization. We have a funding update, which is that we did get the funding that we were seeking from CDOT, the seed money, so that's $100,000. All told, we have $237,500 to be able to start the PMO. We will be looking at consultants that can help us set the plan that we have in place, and people should be expecting an email that will give out some of the scope of work that we're expecting from both the contractor and potentially the staff that would be a part of that. And we discussed the North Front Range NPO 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, and then Johnny Olson gave us an update on the Merge project in Greeley. And then we adjourned. Our next meeting is July 6th. Make it?
1 candy bar.
Snickers. All right.
That's the first one.
Two more.
You got 2 more. You can earn 2 more here.
So the non-attainment area air pollution mitigation enterprise, we met last week. We discussed fee levels, which will be increasing, not because we are increasing them, but under statute they can be increased because of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And so rideshare is going from 22.5 cents to 23.25 cents, and the retail delivery fee was 0.7 cents, will now be 73/100 cent. We adopted our budget, which I guess will have to be changed because of the new legislation. Our next meeting is March 30th.
2.
Okay. Now it's
Just,
I get to take a breather.
yeah, okay. Front Range Passenger Rail District, Councilor Olson and Mayor Karspek, please.
Well, we'll do 2 different bars there, but you go first.
So you heard the report. I think that's all I got.
Boom. Jeez. That just cost me. There's like $2 right there, Mark.
I want to add a little bit. There's a couple things that I wanted to let everybody know, so I'm going to expand on this. I've been, me and Council Member Mallow have been selected to the National League of Cities Infrastructure and Transportation Committee. So we'll be representing. We are looking, and I think I'll send out an email, but we're looking for ways that we can streamline grant processes or rail or anything that we could get that we could take back, because we will be lobbying Congress to try to improve the processes. So if anybody on this council gets it to John or I, we can then articulate the concerns of Colorado and work, because we are representing municipalities and being able to get those in. So that'd be good. Second, I was selected to be on the USDOT AASHTO Transportation Resiliency Committee. It's a national committee that will be putting in platforms and design standards and how to. All states get a Protect grant. There's like $80 million in Protect grant money, and no one really knows how to use them. No one knows how to fortitude to do it. So I'll be on that committee representing the city of Greeley and my company at the same time. So I just wanted to let people know if there's anything on resiliency or things that come out, I will get things out as I need, but I'll be doing that for the next year. So.
That's great.
Sir?
We also, with the Furnish Passenger Rail, we hired our first assistant too. So Andy has someone to work with. So we're finally having our subcommittees meet. So I'm on the communication subcommittee. I think you're on the policy one, aren't you?
Planning council.
Yeah. So that's good. We can finally break out. That's it.
Okey doke. Host council member report. Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed your many hours in Winter Mechanics. Longer than others. But, you know, hope you enjoyed your time here, and we're glad to have you. Just a couple of the projects that we're working on, Highway 287 and 57th Street with NMOF funding. We're wrapping up right away an easement acquisition, and construction will begin later this fall. Signalization on Highway 34 and Glade Road, that's HSIP funding is starting design. We have a project on Shield Street. I think that's widening the shoulders. I got the yes from Mark. There's multiple funding. I'm not even going to name it all, but there's 6 or 7 different forms of funding for that. Should start construction next spring. Taft Hill from Horsetooth to Harmony, in partnership with City of Fort Collins, is under design. We have a budget shortfall. We'll be seeking additional grant opportunities. The Poudre River Trail, funded through MMOF, will begin construction later this summer. We applied for a raised grant. We found out in the Upper Front Range that we are one of 21 communities in Colorado that did, so good luck to all. That will be for design of Country Club Road from Highway 1 to Turnberry, and for HSIP funding to signalize the intersection of Highway 14 and County Road 5 north of the new Timnath Middle/High School. And we were awarded the Safe Streets for All grant funding to complete a safety action plan, which should put us in place to apply for future and implementation funding. And that is all.
Beautiful. Okay. Folks, thank you for an extended meeting. If you have any suggestions for next month's agenda, please get those to Suzette. And nothing fit further. Yes, please.
I just want to say that we do have Andrew Bosnecker for next month.
Okay.
He will be joining us next month to talk about legislative items.
Oh,
Yep.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll stand adjourned. Thanks.